It was a bright Saturday morning, and the community hall was already buzzing with activity. People were moving in and out, setting up tables, adjusting lights, and testing microphones. Today was the day of the annual talent showcase, an event that everyone looked forward to. Local musicians, artists, and creators of all ages gathered to share their skills. Among the crowd, a young woman stood quietly near the back, holding a small bag with her belongings. She was not loud or attention-seeking. There was a calm confidence in her posture that set her apart. She had been preparing for this day for weeks. Every evening, after finishing her work at the local cafe, she would sit in her tiny apartment and practice. She wasn't trying to impress anyone but herself. Her fingers moved over her instrument with care, every note deliberate, every movement thoughtful. She knew the power of patience and practice. It wasn't about showing off. It was about expressing something deep inside her. As she checked her bag one more time, making sure everything was in place, she noticed a man leaning against the wall nearby. He was tall, with a confident smirk and a presence that drew attention. He carried himself like he owned the room, and he had a way of looking at people that made them feel small. He was also a participant, but unlike her, he enjoyed the spotlight. He thrived on it. People often laughed at his jokes, some genuine, some nervous, trying to fit in. He was the kind of person who needed to be the best, or at least appear to be. The young woman tried to focus on her own preparations, but she couldn't ignore his voice as he started talking to the small group around him. He boasted about his skills, his years of experience, and how easy today's showcase would be for him. There was a sense of arrogance in every word, a belief that no one here could match him. When he noticed her standing nearby, he pointed and laughed, drawing the attention of the group. "And look at her," he said with a chuckle. "She's probably just hoping she doesn't mess up. Good luck with that." His laughter echoed through the room, and the group joined in. Some laughed politely, unsure of how to react, while others exchanged glances that betrayed their discomfort. The young woman felt her stomach tighten, a mixture of anger and determination rising inside her. She had expected skepticism, but not open mockery. She took a deep breath, grounding herself. She knew that reacting angrily would only give him more satisfaction. Instead, she let his words wash over her. Focusing on the hours she had spent practicing, the late nights, the dedication, the quiet moments when no one was watching, she reminded herself that this day was about her and her skill, not about him. The group around him continued to laugh, whispering jokes, clearly enjoying the show. He strutted across the room, showing off his instrument, tapping it, speaking loudly about how easy his performance would be. He had an audience, and he was soaking up every bit of attention. The young woman, by contrast, kept to herself. She checked her instrument one last time, making sure it was tuned perfectly, the way she liked it. She ran her fingers lightly over it, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. She knew her preparation would speak louder than words, as the organizers called the participants to prepare for the first round. She felt a mix of nerves and excitement. This was her chance. She would not be rushed or distracted. She would play in her own time, at her own pace, letting the music flow naturally. She reminded herself that talent is not measured by how loud or showy one is, but by the heart and soul put into every note. He continued to make comments, glancing at her and shaking his head with a smirk. "Don't worry," he said loudly. "I'll make sure everyone remembers who the real star is today." His words were meant to intimidate, but she refused to let them penetrate her focus. She knew that confidence without skill could only go so far. She had her own quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you've put in the work. The audience began to fill the hall, taking their seats, chatting excitedly. The atmosphere was electric, a mix of anticipation and curiosity. Everyone was waiting to see the talents on display, to witness moments that would inspire or surprise them. She found a corner near the side, where she could observe without distraction. She watched the man as he practiced a few flashy notes, the way his fingers moved quickly, but without true depth. He seemed more concerned with how it looked than how it sounded. As the first few participants performed, she felt the tension in her chest begin to ease. She listened, absorbing the energy of the room, and reminding herself that every performance was a step toward her own. Each note played by others added to her understanding, teaching her patience and timing. She observed the crowd's reactions. The moments when people were genuinely moved versus when they were simply impressed by showiness. Finally, it was almost time for her turn. She could feel the weight of anticipation in the air, but instead of panicking, she welcomed it. She stepped forward quietly, drawing the attention of a few nearby audience members. The man noticed and raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk forming on his lips. He leaned toward someone and whispered, clearly confident that she would falter. She placed her hands on her instrument, closed her eyes for a brief moment, and let the calm she had cultivated over weeks of practice settle over her. She didn't need to prove anything to him or anyone else. She only needed to play the way she had prepared, letting the music tell the story. The room fell silent as she began. At first, the notes were soft, almost tentative, but there was a clarity to them that drew people in. The man's smirk faltered slightly as he listened, unsure of what to make of the delicate precision in her performance. Each note seemed to carry intention, emotion, and skill beyond what anyone had expected. The audience leaned in, sensing something different, something real and heartfelt. Her hands moved gracefully, not rushed or showy, but with a fluidity that revealed the countless hours of practice. She closed her eyes again, letting herself become one with the music. The sound filled the room, commanding attention not through volume or flamboyance, but through authenticity and mastery. The man's earlier laughter seemed distant now, almost childish in comparison to the presence she had created. Even though this was only the beginning of her performance, it was clear to some in the audience that something extraordinary was unfolding. Whispers began to spread, but she remained focused, unaffected by the murmurs. She was in her element, every note a reflection of her dedication and quiet strength. The room, once filled with chatter and laughter, was now captivated, waiting to see how this young woman would continue. She ended her piece with a soft, lingering note, holding it just long enough for the room to absorb it. The silence hung for a heartbeat before applause erupted, polite at first, and growing louder as people realized the depth of her talent. The man who had mocked her just moments ago stared in disbelief. His confidence wavered as he struggled to process what he had just heard. She opened her eyes and smiled softly, not at him but at the room, acknowledging the audience's appreciation. There was no gloating in her expression, only quiet pride and relief. She had proven to herself that her skill and dedication could shine. Regardless of the doubt or mockery she faced, as she stepped back, allowing the next participant to take the stage, she felt a sense of calm triumph. The day was far from over, and there were more performances to witness, but she had set the tone. The young woman had faced mockery with grace and skill, turning doubt into admiration. And though the man still lingered in the back of her mind, she knew that her true challenge was not him, but continuing to stay true to her own abilities, to keep improving, and to let her work speak for itself. After the applause settled from her initial performance, she returned to her corner to prepare for the next round. The hall was still buzzing with conversations, but she didn't feel pressure or fear. Instead, she felt a renewed focus. She knew the first impression was just a glimpse of her abilities, and there was more to show, more to reveal, and more to prove not to him, but to herself and anyone willing to truly listen. She unpacked her instrument carefully, checking every string, every key, and every detail. It was a ritual she had followed for years, one that grounded her and allowed her to enter a state of complete calm. Her mind wandered briefly to all the evenings spent practicing alone. The times she felt tired, the moments when progress seemed slow, and the determination that pushed her to continue. These memories filled her with quiet strength. Every small effort added up, and now, here she was, ready to transform all that work into something real and tangible. Meanwhile, the man who had mocked her earlier noticed the shift. He had been speaking with other participants, showing off his confidence and charm. But now he caught himself glancing in her direction more than once. There was an edge of unease in his posture that hadn't been there before. He tried to hide it, but anyone watching closely could see that her performance had affected him. He whispered something to someone near him and laughed, but the laughter sounded forced, hollow. Deep down, he knew she had talent. The kind of talent that was more than flash, it was skill, discipline, and heart. She watched the other participants as well. There were musicians with flashy techniques, artists presenting elaborate designs, and creators who worked with lights and colors in ways that dazzled. The audience. Each act was unique, each performance a story. She didn't feel jealousy or competition. She felt inspiration. Every participant reminded her why she loved creating and performing. The hall was alive with energy, and she let that energy flow into her, fueling her anticipation for the next piece she would perform. Back in her corner, she began to mentally map out the sequence she had prepared for the next round. This piece was different. It required more precision, more control, and more emotion. She closed her eyes and imagined herself performing it perfectly, each note landing exactly as she intended. She visualized the expressions of the audience, not for validation, but to understand how her music could move people. She thought about how sound could create an experience, how it could make someone feel a memory, a joy, or even a small shiver of surprise as she continued to focus. She noticed small details she had overlooked before: the lighting on the stage, the way certain sounds echoed in the hall, the subtle reactions of people moving around. All of these tiny details mattered. She adjusted her approach in her mind, imagining the way her hands would move, the pauses she would take, and the crescendo she wanted to build. Every decision was intentional. She felt a sense of excitement growing, a thrill that came from knowing she had control over her performance in a way few could. Understand? The man continued to linger nearby, making small comments under his breath, trying to maintain his image. He practiced a few quick notes on his instrument, louder and faster than necessary, clearly attempting to draw attention back to himself. But the audience's focus had already shifted. People whispered to each other about the young woman's talent, wondering how someone so quiet and unassuming could create such a powerful effect. His smirk wavered for a moment, but he quickly forced it back into place. Confidence was his armor, even when he began to doubt it. She took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm wash over her again. She didn't need to react to him, didn't need to prove anything to anyone except herself. Her focus was on the music, on the story she wanted to tell through her performance. The room was filled with subtle anticipation, a tension that built naturally as the next act approached. The audience didn't yet know the impact her next piece would have, but she did. She had spent weeks preparing for this exact moment, and she felt ready. Her turn came again, and this time, she stepped onto the stage with a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the man's showy demeanor. She placed her hands on her instrument, feeling its familiar weight and texture, and closed her eyes for a moment to center herself. The first note rang out, soft but clear, resonating in the hall and immediately drawing the audience's attention. She didn't rush. She let the music breathe, allowing each note to have its own presence. The man watched from the side, his earlier smugness replaced by curiosity and a hint of worry. He realized that her performance was more than technical skill. It carried emotion and depth, something that could not be faked or rushed. Each note seemed intentional, crafted to move the listener in a way that words could not. The audience leaned forward, captivated, some with eyes wide in wonder, some with gentle smiles as the music touched them unexpectedly. She allowed herself to feel the music as she played, letting it guide her fingers, her posture, her breath. There was a natural rhythm to her movements, a flow that had been built over countless hours of practice. It was not flashy, not designed to impress with speed or volume, but designed to convey sincerity. People began to notice the subtlety, the nuance, the quiet power behind each sound. The energy in the hall shifted. It was no longer just a talent showcase, it was a shared experience, a connection between performer and audience. Halfway through her piece, she introduced a variation that she had been experimenting with, a small improvisation that reflected her personal style. It was unexpected yet seamlessly integrated, and the audience responded with soft murmurs of appreciation. The man's eyes widened slightly, as if he were seeing a skill he had never anticipated. He tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear that he was impressed. Even if he would never admit it out loud, she continued, building her performance carefully, layering complexity over simplicity, emotion over technique. She allowed pauses to create tension, then released it with flowing sequences that demonstrated both control and passion. It was a delicate balance, one that only comes from hours of practice and deep understanding of one's craft. By the time she reached the climax of her piece, the audience was fully engaged, every ear attuned to her performance, every eye fixed on the subtle expressions she allowed to show on her face. When she finally ended the piece, the room was silent for a heartbeat. Then, slowly applause began, polite at first, then growing louder and more enthusiastic. People stood, some clapping with surprise, others smiling in admiration, all acknowledging the remarkable talent they had just witnessed. She stepped back, allowed herself a small, modest smile, and felt a quiet warmth in her chest. She had communicated something real, something that could not be doubted or mocked. The man, who had mocked her earlier, now stood in stunned silence. His usual confidence was shaken, replaced with something unfamiliar respect, tinged with disbelief. He realized that skill and heart could not be overshadowed by arrogance or showmanship. She had done more than perform. She had made people feel, and that was a power no one could take away. Back in her corner, she allowed herself a moment to breathe, to feel the satisfaction of her work. She didn't need validation. The applause was enough, but the real victory was knowing she had stayed true to herself, her preparation, and her dedication. Every note she had played carried her effort, her patience, and her quiet determination. The man's presence no longer mattered. She had proven something far more important, that sincere effort and focused skill could surpass mockery and arrogance every time. As the next round of participants prepared to perform, she felt a sense of calm anticipation. There was more to come, more chances to demonstrate her abilities, more opportunities to express herself fully. She had learned something important today, that preparation, focus, and dedication could carry a person through challenges and skepticism. And though the man still lingered nearby, she knew that her real challenge was not to outshine him, but to continue growing, improving, and letting her talent speak for itself. The next round of performances began with a flurry of energy and excitement. Participants moved onto the stage, each bringing their own flair and style. The young woman observed quietly from her spot, noting the different techniques and approaches each performer took. Some were bold and flashy, grabbing attention immediately, while others were subtle, slowly drawing the audience in with delicate touches and precise timing. She appreciated both styles, but she knew that her strength lay in a balance between skill, motion, and subtlety. The man who had mocked her earlier was preparing himself for his next act. He paced back and forth, adjusting his instrument, testing a few notes, and looking around the room as if the entire audience existed solely to admire him. He had a confidence that bordered on arrogance, and his gestures and expressions were meant to impress. He believed that his skill alone would make him the star of the event, and he seemed oblivious to the impact the young woman had already made with her quiet, heartfelt performance. She continued to observe, taking in every detail, the way the lights reflected off the stage, the way certain notes carried differently depending on the position of the audience, the subtle reactions of people in the room. All of these small observations fed into her preparation, allowing her to adjust mentally and anticipate how she would play. Her focus was unwavering. She was not distracted by the man's antics or the applause of others. She had her own path to follow, one that had been built through months of dedication and practice. As the man moved to the stage, he greeted the audience with a confident smile, waving his hands and making gestures that drew immediate attention. He played the first few notes of his piece with dramatic flair, fast and loud, filling the hall with a sense of spectacle. Some audience members clapped politely, impressed by the speed and complexity of his performance. But there was a subtle difference in reaction compared to when she had performed. His performance was showy, but it lacked the depth and emotional resonance that her earlier performance had carried from the side. She watched carefully, analyzing the strengths and weaknesses of his approach. She noted how he relied on volume and speed to create an effect, but the music felt somewhat mechanical. It was skillful, yes, but it lacked a soul. She didn't feel threatened or intimidated. Instead, she reminded herself of the value of authenticity and intention. She knew that her own performance, grounded in genuine emotion and careful technique, could create a connection that mere showmanship could not. As he continued, he made a few exaggerated gestures, clearly seeking applause and admiration from the audience. He smiled as he received some recognition. But the young woman noticed that the eyes of some spectators were searching for more than just speed and loudness. They were waiting for subtlety, emotion, a story that resonated. This realization strengthened her resolve. She knew that when her turn came again, she would give the audience something that they couldn't ignore or forget. The other participants followed, each showcasing their skills in turn. Some were creative with instruments, others presented visual performances that complemented their music. The hall was alive with variety, and the energy was infectious. She allowed herself to appreciate the diversity of talent around her, feeling inspired rather than threatened. She reminded herself that this was not about competing against anyone else, but about expressing her own voice, her own story through her craft. Finally, it was her turn again. She stepped onto the stage with calm confidence, carrying herself with quiet dignity. She placed her hands on her instrument, feeling its familiar weight, and closed her eyes for a moment to center herself. She could hear the faint echoes of the previous performances, the murmurs of the audience, and even the man who had mocked her watching from the side. None of it mattered. She was fully present in the moment, ready to let her music speak. The first note rang out, soft yet clear, filling the hall with a gentle resonance. She didn't rush. She allowed each note to flow naturally, creating a sense of space and depth. The audience leaned in, sensing the difference between this performance and the others. Her music was not loud or flashy, but it carried intention, precision, and emotion. Each movement of her hands, each subtle shift in tone, told a story that could be felt rather than simply observed. The man watched closely, his confidence faltering slightly as he realized that her skill went far beyond mere technique. There was a level of control and understanding in her playing that could not be faked. He tried to maintain his composure, but it was clear that he was beginning to respect, even admire the depth of her talent. She did not gloat or acknowledge him. She focused entirely on the music and the connection she was creating with the audience. Halfway through her performance, she introduced a subtle variation that highlighted her creativity and understanding of the instrument. It was not a dramatic flourish, but a delicate shift that enhanced the overall experience. The audience responded immediately, some leaning forward, eyes wide with fascination. Others closing their eyes, letting the music wash over them. There was a shared sense of wonder in the room, a collective acknowledgement of something extraordinary unfolding before them. She continued, layering emotion and technical skill seamlessly. She allowed pauses that created tension, then resolved them with flowing sequences that demonstrated both mastery and expression. Every note was intentional, every movement deliberate. Creating an experience that went beyond performance, it was storytelling through sound. The audience was captivated, fully engaged, experiencing the music not just with their ears but with their hearts. As she reached the climax of her piece, the energy in the hall intensified. The music swelled naturally, carrying the audience along with it, drawing them into the world she had created on stage. It was not about showing off speed or complexity. It was about creating a shared emotional journey. The man who had mocked her earlier could no longer hide his astonishment. He watched in silence, realizing that true skill and dedication could command attention and admiration far more effectively than arrogance and bravado. When she concluded her performance, the hall fell silent for a brief moment. Then applause erupted, growing from polite clapping to enthusiastic cheers. People stood, clapping and expressing their appreciation for the depth, precision, and emotional resonance of what they had just witnessed. She stepped back from the stage, allowing herself a small, modest smile. There was no need for words. The response of the audience spoke volumes. She had shared something authentic and had been received with genuine admiration. The man remained on the side, stunned and introspective. His earlier mockery had been replaced by an unspoken recognition of her talent. He realized that skill, dedication, and authenticity could not be overshadowed by confidence alone. The young woman had created an impact that went beyond performance. She had moved people, connecting with them in a way that left a lasting impression. Back in her corner, she allowed herself to breathe, feeling the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment. She had faced skepticism, mockery, and doubt, yet she had remained focused and true to herself. Her music had conveyed her story, her dedication, and her emotion, and the audience had responded. She knew that the real journey was ongoing. Each performance was a step toward mastery, each challenge an opportunity to grow. The man who had mocked her would not forget this day, nor would anyone who had witnessed the depth of her talent. She had shown that quiet dedication and genuine skill could create moments of wonder that lingered, far longer than arrogance or showmanship ever could. The room was electric with anticipation. As the next round of performances began, each participant brought their own flair and skill, keeping the audience engaged. But there was a subtle shift in energy ever since the young woman had performed. People whispered to each other, sharing glances and nodding, clearly intrigued by what they had witnessed. She could feel it too. A quiet recognition spreading through the room that something remarkable had already taken place. She prepared herself for her next performance with meticulous care. This time, she had something special in mind, a piece she had been refining for months. It was not just a display of skill, it was a story, a journey, a single piece designed to leave a lasting impact. She focused intently, recalling every note, every pause, every subtle expression she wanted to convey. She didn't feel nervous. She felt ready. The man who had mocked her earlier was watching closely. His earlier confidence had waned slightly after witnessing her previous performances. He tried to mask it with casual gestures, practicing a few notes, and offering faint smiles. But the sharp edge of his arrogance had softened under the weight of undeniable skill. He realized that she had something he hadn't anticipated, a depth, a calm mastery that commanded attention effortlessly. As she approached the stage, she could feel the energy in the room shift. The audience was waiting, curious and expectant, but she didn't let that distract her. She had learned that focus and composure were more powerful than any flashy gesture. She placed her hands on her instrument, closed her eyes, and allowed herself a single deep breath. In that moment, she became completely immersed in her music. The first note was soft, almost tentative, but it carried a weight that immediately drew the audience in. She didn't rush. She let each note breathe, each pause resonate, allowing the music to create its own rhythm in the room. People leaned forward, captivated, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding. Her performance wasn't about impressing the audience with speed or volume. It was about creating a connection, letting every note tell a part of her story. The man watched, unable to hide his growing admiration. He had mocked her skills earlier, assuming she was inexperienced. But he now realized that he had underestimated her completely. Her music had a natural flow, an emotional depth, and a precision that could not be faked or rushed. He had skill, yes, but hers was the kind that could move people in ways he had never experienced. As she continued, she began to introduce subtle variations, shifts in tone and timing that added layers of complexity to the piece. The audience responded intuitively, drawn into the unfolding narrative. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others watched her hands in awe, amazed at the control and grace she exhibited. Every movement, every pause, every note had a purpose, and it was clear that she had poured her heart into perfecting this moment. Midway through her performance, she reached the pivotal section, the one piece she had been saving for this exact moment. It was a combination of technical mastery and emotional expression that demanded attention. She executed it flawlessly, the sound filling the room, creating an atmosphere that was almost tangible. The audience was captivated, silent in the first heartbeat, then erupting in gasps and whispers of amazement. The room seemed to hold its breath. Collectively stunned by the brilliance unfolding before them, the man's expression changed. His confidence, once unwavering, was replaced by astonishment. He had never seen anything like it. He watched, unable to intervene, as the young woman's skill and heart commanded the room. Every subtle nuance, Every intentional pause and every precise note created an effect that left the audience completely enthralled. He realized that he had been wrong, that mocking her earlier was not just unfair but foolish. She had transcended expectations with a single, extraordinary performance. As the one piece reached its climax, the audience responded with uncontainable admiration. Applause erupted, first polite, then growing louder, filling the hall with an overwhelming sense of awe. People stood, clapping, cheering, and exchanging amazed glances. She had not only performed, but had captivated everyone present, leaving a mark that would not be forgotten. Her quiet confidence and dedication had turned skepticism into wonder, doubt into admiration. She allowed the final note to linger, holding it just long enough for the audience to fully absorb the moment. Silence followed, a testament to the impact of her performance, before the applause swelled again, even louder this time. She smiled modestly, feeling a quiet sense of triumph. She didn't need to boast or call attention to herself. Her music had spoken for her, conveying everything words could not. The man who had mocked her earlier was now at a loss for words. He stared, stunned, finally understanding the depth of her talent. His previous arrogance had faded, replaced by a begrudging respect. He realized that skill, dedication, and authenticity could not be overshadowed by confidence or showmanship alone. He had been shown a lesson in humility and the power of true mastery. Back in her corner, allowed herself a moment to reflect. She had faced mockery, doubt, and the challenge of performing under pressure, yet she had succeeded. Her music had conveyed her journey, her dedication, and her emotional depth, leaving the audience inspired and amazed. She knew that this was not the end, but a significant milestone in her growth as a performer. People approached her afterward, expressing admiration and curiosity about her skill. Some participants nodded in respect, acknowledging the power of her performance. Even those who had doubted her could not ignore what they had witnessed. She responded with humility, graciously accepting compliments without arrogance, understanding that her true reward was the connection she had created through her art. As the event continued, she observed the remaining performances with appreciation, inspired by the diversity of talent and creativity around her. Yet the memory of her one piece lingered in the minds of the audience and participants alike. It was a moment of revelation, demonstrating that dedication, focus, and authenticity could achieve extraordinary results. The man who had mocked her earlier now carried a newfound respect and understanding, realizing that true skill could not be diminished by ego or doubt. By the end of the showcase, it was clear that her performance had become the highlight of the event. People talked about it long after, sharing the impact it had on them. She had shown that quiet determination and genuine skill could surpass arrogance, mockery, and superficial display. The one piece she had performed had left an impression that no one would forget. Solidifying her presence as a remarkable talent in the community, she left the stage feeling a sense of calm fulfillment. The applause, admiration, and recognition were meaningful. But the real achievement lay in knowing that she had stayed true to herself. She had transformed preparation, patience, and focus into an unforgettable experience for everyone present. Her journey was ongoing, but this moment would serve as a powerful reminder of what dedication and heart could achieve. The man who had mocked her earlier would carry this lesson with him, and the audience would remember the quiet performer who had stunned them all with a single, extraordinary piece. As the showcase began to wind down, the atmosphere in the hall was different from when the event had started. There was a quiet reverence, a lingering energy from the performances that had moved people. Among all the participants, the young woman had left the deepest impression. Her calm confidence, her skill, and most importantly, the emotional connection she had created with her music had become the talk of the room. People discussed her performance in hushed tones. Still processing what they had witnessed, she remained in her corner, observing the final acts with a sense of calm satisfaction. Each performer brought something unique, but she no longer felt pressure or comparison. She had proven her capabilities not only to the audience, but also to herself. The journey she had undertaken over months of practice, late nights, and unwavering dedication had culminated in a moment of recognition that was both gratifying and humbling. She understood that this was not the end, but a beginning, a milestone. On the road of continuous growth and mastery, the man who had mocked her earlier approached hesitantly. His usual confident stride was replaced with a quieter, more measured step. He looked at her, a mixture of awe and humility evident in his expression. There was a moment of silence before he spoke, as if he were carefully choosing his words. I didn't expect that," he admitted, his tone subdued. "You were incredible. Truly incredible." Was no arrogance, no attempt to diminish her achievement. Just an honest acknowledgement of the talent and dedication she had displayed. She nodded politely, offering a small smile. She accepted his words with grace, not seeking to belittle or gloat. She understood that acknowledgement from someone who had doubted her was meaningful. But her satisfaction came from the knowledge that she had stayed true to herself and her craft. "Thank you," she said simply. "I appreciate that." There was no bitterness, no triumphalism, just a shared understanding of the power of skill, patience, and dedication. The audience, sensing this exchange, responded with renewed admiration. Some approached to express their appreciation, others simply watched in quiet awe. She responded to each compliment with warmth, careful to remain humble, understanding that her journey was ongoing. The applause from earlier performances had been gratifying, but this personal acknowledgement from someone who had doubted her carried its own weight. It was a reminder that patience, focus, authenticity could overcome skepticism and even arrogance. As people began to leave the hall, the organizers approached her with congratulations. They expressed how impressed they were, noting that her performance had elevated the entire showcase. The young woman accepted their words graciously, her focus not on accolades but on the realization that her dedication had created a meaningful experience for others. It was a moment of quiet triumph, confirmation that the hours of practice and perseverance had borne fruit. She took a moment to reflect on her journey. From the countless evenings spent practicing alone to the moments of doubt and frustration, every step had led to this moment. She understood that skill was built not only through talent but through consistent effort, patience, and a willingness to learn from mistakes. The recognition she had received was gratifying, but the true reward was the growth she had experienced and the connection she had fostered with those who had witnessed her performance. The man who had mocked her lingered nearby, now quietly observing the remaining participants. He had been humbled, and the experience had shifted something within him. He realized that true mastery was not about showmanship or arrogance, but about dedication, authenticity, and the ability to move others through skill and expression. He had been given a lesson in humility and respect, one that he would carry forward in his own pursuits as the hall emptied. She packed up her instrument, careful and deliberate, savoring the moment. The applause and admiration were behind her, but the memory of the connection she had created lingered. She knew that her journey was far from over. There would be more performances, more challenges, and more opportunities to grow. Each experience, each audience, each note played was a step toward greater mastery and deeper understanding of her craft. Walking out of the hall, she felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. The cold air outside was refreshing, and the quiet streets provided a moment of reflection. She thought about the people who had doubted her, the man who had mocked her skills, and the audience who had been moved by her music. Each interaction had contributed to her understanding of perseverance, humility, and the importance of staying true to oneself. Her thoughts turned to the future. She considered the possibilities that lay ahead, the performances yet to come, and the experiences that would continue to shape her journey. She understood that recognition and applause were fleeting, but the skills, discipline, and authenticity she had cultivated were lasting. These qualities would carry her through challenges, inspire others, and allow her to create moments that resonated deeply with those who experienced her work as she walked. She reflected on the lessons learned from the man who had mocked her. His arrogance had been a challenge, a test of her composure and focus. By staying true to her own path and maintaining her dedication, she had transformed skepticism into admiration. She realized that obstacles and doubt were not hindrances, but opportunities to demonstrate resilience, skill, and integrity. Each challenge was a chance to grow, to refine her craft, to connect with others through her work. She felt a sense of gratitude for the experiences that had led to this point. The long hours of practice, the moments of self-doubt, and the challenges she had faced had all contributed to her growth. She understood that mastery was not an endpoint, but a continuous journey, one that required patience, dedication, and a willingness to learn and adapt. Her success in the showcase was a testament to these values, a reflection of the effort and heart she had invested in her craft. As she returned home, she allowed herself to relax, savoring the satisfaction of a day well lived. She thought about the people who had been inspired by her performance, the connections she had created, and the personal growth she had experienced. She understood that her journey was ongoing, and that each step, each performance, each interaction would continue to shape her path. The experience had reinforced her belief in the power of dedication, skill, and authenticity, and she carried this understanding forward with quiet pride. The man who had mocked her earlier left the hall with a changed perspective. He had witnessed firsthand the impact of true skill and dedication, and he would not forget the lesson. The young woman had demonstrated that confidence without substance was fragile, while quiet focus, perseverance, and genuine talent could command respect and admiration. The experience had transformed his view of talent, humility, and the importance of